Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Program that we haven't really talked about all that much over the last couple months, that's the Yukon Huskies, okay? And so the bottom line with Yukon, I would say this, I do think, honestly, that it's been a very quiet summer by design for Dan Hurley. Dan Hurley has said publicly, like, the last 2 summers have basically been like an extension from the season. You win a national championship. It's a lot of, ringing the stock market bell and first pitches and dinners and events and this and that. And I think in a lot of ways, I think he's been excited about getting back to coaching ball and keeping a low profile. Obviously, last summer, not this past one, but the summer before, he actually was, he went through the process with the Los Angeles Lakers. And he actually told John Rothstein last week, he's like, I didn't even think about the NBA this year. That's not in my wheelhouse right now. Well, I bring it up because it's been a busy couple days for Dan Hurley. I want to get to something that he said a few days ago. But before we get to it, though, a couple things. One, as always, make sure to follow our Torres on Yukon account for all your late-breaking Yukon news. Torres on Yukon, that's on Twitter. But also, it's been a busy week for Yukon for a couple reasons. First of all, this is the most 2025 college basketball story ever. On Monday, they got not one, but 2 different commitments for this 2025-26 season. So in other words, the season that's coming up, Yukon on Monday added 2 more pieces to the puzzle. The first one, and you can see it all on the screen. And by the way, I'm going to ruin these names. 6'4" guard, Uros Paunovic. He's 22 years old. He is originally from Serbia. He joins the fray. I think I said 6'4". Yukon has him officially listed at 6'3", so I'll trust Yukon on that. Also, this is a very interesting one as well, and this is the name that I'm definitely going to butcher. Renzone Alejaj, who is a 7'1", 17-year-old center from Turkey. Okay, and this is where it gets interesting. So one, listen, I'll just say this before we get to the Dan Hurley quote. I really enjoy this era of college basketball because, one, keep in mind, we now have 15 scholarships, okay? And why that's important. You can actually build out real teams. You can build out real teams in college basketball now, right? So it used to be, year to year, you're flipping over your roster, you're whatever. Now, with the 15 scholarships, what a lot of schools are doing is, they're prioritizing the 4, 5, 6 players that are going to be kind of that core. Maybe 2, 3 of them are kind of, the financial focal point, if you will. But then they're backfilling their rosters using those extra scholarships with developmental players, with European players, with international players, guys that can get better. And I think you're starting to see more teams being built than just individual rosters, okay? So both these guys are going to come in. I don't think either of them is frankly going to play very much of a role this year. But at the very least, Uros is a 23-year-old with a lot of experience playing overseas. At the very least, he is going to make practices much more competitive. I think he can absolutely step in if need be, if somebody gets hurt or whatever. But at the very least, he's going to be a great practice player. And, I don't know how much eligibility he'll have, but for another year or 2, maybe he could be an impact player. The Renzone Alaj, I think what's interesting is Dan Hurley's actual quote on him. I'll just quote Dan Hurley. Says he's an interesting prospect, a true 7-footer who just turned 18. So I think I said 17 earlier, but he's 18. We're looking forward to bringing him into our program and working on his development. So if you're Yukon, this is a perfect scenario. 7-footer, just turned 18, would be a senior in high school if he was in the States. You get him in your program, you get to develop him. And like I said, I think you get to intensify practices. I think he adds a true 7-footer that maybe the team was sort of lacking. Terrace Reed's about 6'9", 6'10". He's physical as heck, but, I don't know that he's a 7-footer. Eric Ryba, the McDonald's All-American, can play inside, but is kind of comfortable all over the place. So anyway, Yukon adds 2 players, but this is what I really want to get to here. It is the fact that I believe people are kind of sleeping on Yukon, okay? So Dan Hurley appeared on John Rothstein's podcast late last week. Now, we've just been so busy with football stuff, we haven't really been able to get to it. But Dan Hurley had some very interesting comments about his 25-26 roster. Tell you what, producer Matt, why don't we play Dan Hurley on John Rothstein's podcast talking about this year's team?
You're going to get another crack at it here in 25-26. Give me your impression so far of the roster you've put together for the upcoming season.
Yeah, I think it's a lot for me, more like the 23 team, where I do think it's it's a strength in numbers. I think the depth is what's going to make it, make it potentially a championship team or a special season for us, where like that battle with our top 10 players, you're going to have to do the things that we didn't do last year, or else you're just not going to stay on the court. So we obviously had major defensive issues last year. We had rebounding issues at times. I think obviously the health and some of the things that we tried to do at point guard this year, I think with Demery and Malachi Smith, and Alec, Melander, and Jacob Furphy, who's got some ability to play over there at 6'5" plus. I think we can rectify a lot of our defense and rebounding. And I think the quality we've got at point guard, can solve some of those things from last year. Because if you don't defend for us this year or rebound the ball the way Yukon has built its championship identity on, you're not going to play. And last year, players got minutes, that didn't guard anywhere near the level that we need them to guard at.
So that was Dan Hurley talking about his 2025-26 roster on the Inside College Basketball podcast with John Rothstein. I'll just say this. He compared this upcoming season to the 2022-2023 National Championship roster. And all I'll say is, if I was a team that had to compete with Dan Hurley and compete with Yukon coming off of last year, I'd be a little bit worried right now if he's comparing it to a national championship team that dominated huge stretches of that season, okay? So first of all, a couple things. One, by the way, for people who don't, you don't remember year to year, if you're not a Yukon fan, I don't blame you. 2023 was the first of the back-to-back national championships, obviously. And frankly, kind of a completely different team, even though it was the same, a lot of the same players. But if you go back to that year, as Dan Hurley said, it was a much deeper team. That was a team where Donovan Clingan came off the bench. It was a team where, Tristan Newton kind of came along at the point guard spot, but it was a deeper team, as he said, strength in numbers. A couple key players from the year before that were returning. In the case of that year, was Adama Sanogo, Andre Jackson, Jordan Hawkins. Why it's noteworthy to me, that team destroyed people to start the season. They started the season 11-0. They went up to the they had that Phil Knight tournament in Portland that year. They went 3-0 in that tournament, destroyed everybody, started 11-0. I believe the stat was all 11 wins were by double figures. Now they got into Big East play. They struggled for about the first 5 or so weeks of Big East play, and then just destroyed everyone once they got to the postseason. Again, dominated the NCAA tournament. They didn't win the Big East tournament that year. Marquette beat them. That was the game, by the way, that Marquette, they said, they called us their second home. We just went into their home and whatever. UConn's like 6-1 against Marquette since that game. No big deal. But they get to the NCAA tournament. They destroy everyone. 6 straight wins by double figures. And so when Dan Hurley says this team reminds him of that, I'd be scared, like I said, if I was a college basketball fan, okay? And I can see the comparison being a Yukon guy. First of all, he didn't say it, but I think he did say it actually. He said, the point guard spot just wasn't good enough last year. And we don't say that disparagingly to our buddy Hassan Diarra, who, by the way, just signed a contract overseas, so we're happy for Hassan. But, when you have 2 years of Tristan Newton, who ended up being a second-round pick, who ended up playing in the NBA, who ended up being the Final Four MVP, most outstanding player in 2024, it's a big drop-off when you lose him. And I said from the beginning, you could go back to tweets I had in Maui. I said he's the biggest X factor. People are going to talk about Steph Castle, who ended up winning Rookie of the Year. Could talk about Donovan Clingan, top 10 pick. It was not having that true point guard that hurt UConn. Well, they have it this year with Silas Demery. I think the other thing that they have that to me is really important is they have depth, okay? He mentioned it, but it's a strength in numbers thing. But it was funny. I mentioned this on the Tours on Yukon page a few days ago, but you look at their second team. I think you could argue their second team would be an NCAA tournament team. And I know every team says that about their second. I'm being serious, okay? Their starting group, I'm not going to spend too much time breaking down their depth chart, but Silas Demery, I mentioned their point guard. Braylon Mullins, a McDonald's All-American. I think the next three will be Solo Ball, who was All Big East second team last year, Alex Caravan, fourth year as a starter, and Terrace Reed. Here's their second team, though. Malachi Smith, who averaged double figures at Dayton last year. Jacob Furphy, who dominated for Team Australia in the U19 championships earlier this summer. Jalen Stewart, Jaden Ross, two players that are fourth year in the program, and Eric Ryba, as I said, a McDonald's All-American. Now, maybe Jalen Stewart starts and another guy comes off the bench. The point I'm trying to make, their second team could legitimately hang with, decent teams in college basketball. And so I just bring it up because when Dan Hurley says that this team reminds him of that team, I think you got to be really, really, really excited as a Yukon fan. And I think the last part that he said really excited me as a Yukon fan as well. It is that basically, I think it's the defensive side. And if you go back to the two Yukon teams that won national championships, offensively, they were great, but defensively, they were great as well, especially 2024 when they had Donovan Clingan. And last year, for all of the issues that you could point to, the point guard, the that, the injuries, it was the defense. They just didn't have the size, the rim protection, the on-the-ball defense. And I think as importantly, I just don't think they had the dudes and they didn't have the depth where if somebody wasn't playing well, you kind of had to keep riding with them, right? Well, this year, as I said, they go a legitimate 10 deep. I think they're going to be really good. I think Dan Hurley is quietly very excited about this team. If you're a Yukon fan, man, I'd be very excited. By the way, Yukon officially dropping their full schedule, their full out-of-conference schedule on Tuesday before our show. Exhibition game against Michigan State. And then from there, the gauntlet begins. Home against Arizona, home against Texas, at Kansas, neutral site games against Illinois, against BYU, against Florida. Listen, we're excited about college football kicking off week 0. College hoops can't get here soon enough either.